Hello, in this video we're going to take a look at the graduated filter tool, which is a great tool for enhancing landscapes. In particular, it can work wonders over skies. Look at my starting image here, and you can see this is a typical problem when shooting landscapes. The sky is much brighter than the land, so if we expose for the land, then the sky is blown out and lacking in detail. But there may be more detail there than first meets the eye. The trick is teasing it out, and we can use the graduated filter to do that and come up with something that's much more dramatic and moody. So let's get cracking. Here I am in Adobe Bridge, and I can right click my starting image here and choose Open in Camera Raw to open it within Photoshop's Camera Raw plugin. And as with any image, we can begin in the basic panel over here by making a few initial adjustments to the overall tone. So I'm going to knock back the exposure a touch. Let's perhaps darken down the highlights a little bit. I'm just trying to pull a bit of detail out of that sky. We could perhaps up the clarity, and that will enhance the textures in these rocks here, and add a touch of dehaze. And this gives us a slightly better starting point. If I toggle all of those adjustments off and on, you can see the difference that makes. Now we need to turn our attentions to the sky and the graduated filter tool. So let's zoom in a little bit to that area there. And what we'll do is grab the graduated filter from the toolbar over here, or we can hit G to access it via a keyboard shortcut. Now the graduated filter tool allows us to make a linear tonal adjustment, so we can create a blend of tones, and we can start by inputting a few tonal settings to the right over here. Notice how we already have some settings here that have been input, and these are from a previous adjustment. So we want to reset the tool to its default, and we can do this and at the same time set an initial adjustment by using these plus or minus icons here. So I know I want to darken the sky here, so I can begin by just clicking the minus icon next to exposure, and I'll click that a couple of times to bring me down to -1. Now I can click and drag down from the sky here, so I'll start somewhere in the middle of the sky and drag down towards the horizon, and you can see how that allows me to darken that area simply by dragging these two lines here. Notice anywhere above that green line there is going to be completely affected by the tonal setting that we have applied, and anywhere below the red line remains completely unaffected, and there's a nice graduated blend in between those 2 points. So the longer we drag the line, the further we can stretch out that blend of tones. Now when we're adjusting skies, we usually want these lines to be perfectly horizontal. We can hold shift and that will snap it to a horizontal line like that, and then I can click and drag down to about here and release, and that gives me my initial tonal adjustment. But at the moment it's not looking all that great. It's looking a bit dull. All we've managed to do is darken down the area. What I'd really like to do is try and pull a bit of detail out of the clouds. So the great thing about using the graduated filter, or indeed any tool within Camera Raw, is that nothing is set in stone. We can go back and tweak anything at any point. So we can go back to these tonal sliders to the right here. We can adjust the exposure if we want to drag that up or down, and we can also go on and use these other tonal sliders here. And I think in this case the clarity and dehaze sliders down here are going to work wonders over my clouds. So I'm going to up the clarity here, and you can see that starts to pull a bit of detail out of that area, and if we up the dehaze here as well, you can see we really start to see some definition in those clouds. So I'll drag that to around about there, I think, and perhaps we could up the contrast a little bit as well, and then just tweak the exposure until everything looks right. So now if I toggle that adjustment off and on by clicking this little icon down here in the corner of the frame here, you can see that's the before, that's the after. So before, we've got a flat featureless sky. After that quick adjustment, we've got something much more dramatic. Now if I hover over one of these pins here, you can see we get a funny color appearing. This is our mask overlay color. You can see down here we can choose a different color for our mask overlay. I quite like this nice bright green color because it allows me to see exactly what's being affected by our adjustment. So you can see the green here is creeping into the land, so we're darkening the tops of these cliffs here, and this is not really what I want. I want to affect the sky, but I want to leave the land unaffected. So we can fine-tune the adjustment to control exactly what's affected or not using these settings to the right over here. If we just highlight the adjustment again by clicking either of those pins. Then we can go down to the settings down here, and incidentally, if you want to see that mask at any point, you can hit Y to toggle the mask view off and on. So let's turn it off for the moment, and I'm going to go down to the range mask settings down here, and this allows me to target specific tones or colors within the adjustment. So I'm going to try setting the range mask down here to luminance. Now this gives me a luminance range slider here, so this allows me to zero in on a specific part of the tonal range within my adjustment. So what I'd like to do is restrict the effect from these darker cliffs here, so I can drag the black point across to the right to restrict the effect from the shadows. Now I can't really see what's happening at the moment, so what I need to do is use a keyboard shortcut here. If I hold Alt and drag the luminance range slider, you can see here we get a black and white view that shows me exactly what's being affected or not. So I know the white areas are going to be affected and the black areas remain preserved. So I'm going to drag the luminance range to around about here, I think, and then I can fine tune it with the smoothness slider here. So if I drag that to the left, you can see we create a harder edge. So now I know I'm targeting the sky a lot more than the land. So I'll release that, and again, if I toggle that adjustment off and on, now you can see how the sky is affected, but the land is more preserved. Now, if we need to fine tune it further, we can also use the brush option, which you'll find at the top of the settings over here. So again, if I just highlight the pin there, then I can go to the brush settings here, and now we get a plus and minus icon here we can use to either add or subtract from the adjustment. So I'm going to use the minus icon, and I'll hit Y, and that allows me to toggle my mask overlay on. Let's zoom in a little closer here, and I can see there's a bit of green creeping in to the cliffs here, so I can use the minus brush here to paint over this area, and that will restrict the effect over here, so it's only going to affect the sky and not these cliffs like this. Let's have a look over here and see how we're looking, and I think we might need to paint over this peak over here as well. So we can just further fine tune our adjustment using the brush option. Now I'll hit Y again to toggle that mask overlay off, and I think we're nearly done here. What I'd like to do is perhaps add a second grad just to darken down the very top of the frame. I find quite often a second grad that just darkens down the top area just adds to the effect. So I'm going to make a new adjustment. I can click the minus icon next to any of these sliders, and that will, as I say, reset everything and just allow me to make a second adjustment, and then I'm going to click and drag down from the top, and that allows me to just darken down that top area there. And again, I can just fine tune the exposure, perhaps add a touch of clarity and dehaze as well until everything looks how I want it to look. If we just zoom out a little bit, you can see now if I toggle all of those adjustments off and on, there's a dramatic difference to the sky. And we can of course finish off by using the tonal sliders. I'm going to go back to the basic panel here, and let's perhaps just cool the image down a bit using the temperature slider here. Let's perhaps desaturate a little bit here with the saturation slider. I think that's probably too cool, so I'm going to just tweak the temperature until that looks about right, somewhere around about there, I think. And I'm happy with that, and I think perhaps we could up the shadows a little bit. Let's just pull a bit of detail out of the foreground like this. And that's my finished landscape. So there we go. That's how to use the graduated filter tool to enhance skies in your landscapes. And if I show you the before and after here, you can see the difference a few settings can make.